If you were to go out and buy a car with a V8 that isn't a traditional V8, so no LSs, no Coyotes, nothing like that. If you're going to go out and buy a car with a V8 from the last 20 years, which is a pretty big berth, so we're talking 2003 and up. So we'll go like 2000, so like 2000 and newer, right? So turn of the century cars and newer. If you're going to go out and buy a car with a V8 that's not an LS and not a Coyote, what would you buy and why? Because I find it very interesting to hear people's answers to this questions because you have a bunch from BMW. You have the M5, you have the V8 M3, even a couple of the regular V8s from the early 2000s made it into like the 540i. Then you have the newer ones like the twin turbo V8s and like the X5M. You have a bunch from Lexus and Toyota. There's one from Volvo. That's the 4.4 liter Yamaha engine. There's Audi. So there's a lot of different offerings. The Mercedes obviously has a V8 in there. Dodge with Hemis. I wouldn't even consider Dodge like a traditional V8 because here in the US it's like LS, Coyote, Hemi. Those are like the three big V8s that always people have, right? So outside of domestics, I guess you could say, international V8s, what would you choose? And not just what you would choose, but what would you choose and why? So I want like an explanation to it. And Chad, I guess we'll get to your answer next. My personal thing is like I've always thought this is an interesting question because it sort of gets you out of the mindset of it has to be an American V8 to be reliable. It has to be an American V8 to make a metric ton of power, which isn't the case. V8s the world over are really cool and unique and interesting in their own right. So for me, I would take one of three different cars, one of which I've already owned. One of them is the V8 M3, just because the S65 engine is very unique. It's almost a one-off, and BMW's never ever made another V8 M3. That's just cool. I foresee in the very distant future, the E9X generation M3s becoming the most valuable because of that, of over all of them. Even the E30s, honestly. I'd say in 50, 60, 70 years time, that's the time frame I'm sort of thinking of here. Just because of it's the only one with a V8. Everyone else has had either a 4-cylinder or a 6-cylinder, going back to the E30. So that's one car I would pick, or one engine I would pick. The other one would be Toyota. What's the one in the LS? I think it's the 2UZ. 2UZ would be one of those. Three UZ.
The 4-liter is the 1UZ. That would be the one you want.
That's the original LS. I'm thinking the second gen LS from 2005.
Right. So they ran parallel for a while, similar to how the 1J still existed when the 2J was in life.
Right.
So
right.
If you're in the UZ platform, so in the 1UZ, there's two different variations. There's non-VVTi and then there's VVTi. VVTi came out right around the same time as they started using the 4.3 liter, which was the 3UZ. The 1UZ VVTi motor is the one you want because it has thicker cylinder walls. The 3UZ is a great engine. It would make an epic swap for like a Miata because 300 plus horsepower, 350 if you put headers and some other goodies on it and so on, is plenty of power in a Miata. But the 1UZ is the one you would want to build because, it has thicker cylinder walls, so it's just a more robust engine. The 2UZ is actually starting to become a favorite amongst high-powered drag racers because it is a steel block. It is basically, it's the same. So the 1UZ and the 3UZ are basically the same exact block, just bored out differently. The 2UZ is actually a taller block, similar to how the 2J is taller than a 1J, meaning the block is longer, so you get the extra stroke, giggity. Because it's a steel block, you don't really have to do much to it, shy of 1,000 horsepower. Rotating assembly, better breathing. All of the UZ engines suffer, so they have a really clever design in the engine where it's dual overhead cam, but the cam, they're really close together. And they use a scissor, and it only has one cam gear. So it's not massively wide like, say, a Coyote would be.
Right.
So and what they have is that they have that gear, and then I think it's on the inside cam. And then they have a scissor gear, which is basically a gear that has some ability to spring. And that runs the second cam. So it's very narrow. The downside to this very clever design is that those heads from factory do not flow great, especially in a performance application. But a 2UZ with ported heads, a good intake manifold, boost it, those things are quickly becoming, they're like the junkyard LS of Japan.
Right.
So, and they're still making that engine today. So you, in the Lexus, what is it, GX 460? That is still a 2UZ. That is like a 20-year-old engine that they've just continuously made. So if you see one of those junked in your local junkyard, that's the least desirable of the three, and it's the most power capable right out of the box. So to answer the question you were saying is, no, not the 4.3-liter 3UZ, you'd have the 1UZ, because it's basically the same motor, just stronger.
So if I was going to buy a modern one, modern being like 2015 and newer, what's in like the RC? So like the RC F-Sport. Yeah, so like that would be like for a modern one. But if I'm really like building one out, I'd probably go with like what you're saying, like the 1UZ. So that would be my second engine. And then the third one, I'd probably go with the Audi 4.2 out of the R8, just because it sounds great with the right exhaust. It's a fairly decently reliable engine overall. It's just everything around it sort of failed, because Audi. But that engine is actually really stout. That's the same engine in the R8, but also in the RS4. That's a great motor. So those are probably the three I do. I'm not a huge fan of Mercedes V8. They're fine. I've just never been an AMG fan, honestly. I've driven a bunch of them, but they just don't give me the fizz the same way like the BMW V8 or an Audi V8 or a Japanese V8 would.
Those are all exceptionally good answers. So I can just pick the engine, right, for a project. I don't have to pick like the car attached to it.
Yeah, I mean, if you wanted to pick a car that's attached to it, cool. But it's more of just like what V8 is just interesting to you that you would buy the car because the engine is already in it, or you would use it for a swap of some kind.
2UR would be up there. It's basically the Japanese Coyote. They're actually, displacement-wise, they're very similar in their power characteristics. They're rev-happy, just like a Coyote is. Then I would go into the VH, I think it is, or the VK. Sorry. The VK family of V8s from Nissan is one of the greatest Japanese V8s that you probably don't really give a second thought to. They love boost, there's all this, but they're mostly in big SUVs and trucks. I think the early VK or VHs made their way into like big Infinities, but most of them are in trucks. And top tip, as if the junkyard LS wasn't a big enough indicator, modern engines, meaning like ECUs, in the last 20 years or so, 15, 20 years, truck engines with better heads and better intake manifold make for great car engines because they're tuned for torque.
It's true.
If you make them rev a little bit, if they can, great power potential. Skid Factory did a VK56 build with ITBs that made like 600 horsepower and revved past 7,500 RPM. I love high revving V8s.
Oh, wow.
The VKs have also found that they were in a whole mess of Nissan motorsport vehicles where a V8 was applied and everything. So they have that motorsport heritage to them. The VH41 is effectively two SR20s in V form, more specifically in the head design than the actual piston size and that. But they love boost out of the factory. And you can make it so that they will fit in a hole originally designed for an all-wheel drive RB26, just in case anybody has any ideas of all-wheel drive V8 GTRs. The fourth...
Yes.
I would probably... The Audi 4.2 is an engine I really like. I would actually love to play around with an R8 with the V8, but have it make more power than a modern V10. Because I think I've said this before in chat or on stream. I like the sound of the V8 more than I do the V10. That's kind of where I would go as far as non-American.
Now, let's get to chat's answers first, and then I have a follow-up question for you.
Okay. So, Andrew, for 4.2-liter V8. Justin's going with the Toyota V8. Toyota's sneaky good at making good V8s. Let's see here.
The original LS being a legendary and literally the first perfect example of that.
Correct. Those came with an LS. Those were 1UZs, by the way. Those were 4 liters.
1UZ.
The
Yep.
LS 430s later were the 3UZ. Andrew doubles down on the S4. It looks like a regular sedan, but with a full exhaust, it rips your face off 100%. I almost got an S4 back in the day, but thankfully I didn't. I got some sense talked into me. Doug, Dodge Magnum, basically a wagon version of today's Challengers and Chargers, because the platform hasn't changed. Doug broke the rules and went American, but hey, whatever. It's not, not a Coyote or an LS. So, Justin, what about a TVR Quebec?
It's Cerbera, is what it's pronounced as. It's Cerbera.
I think that had a BMW V8. I would gladly cede that floor to you guys because I have absolutely no idea. TVRs kind of sort of, some of them like the Cigaris or Sagris or something where like,
oh yeah,
that was pretty cool, but like most of the time TVRs were like, hi, we didn't stop styling this car. Never really was a big fan, but I understand their appeal, if that makes any sense.
I'm trying to see what they actually had as engines. I'm on the Wikipedia page. Looks like they got V8s from Rover originally. When Rover was purchased by BMW, Peter Wheeler did not want to risk supply chain problems should the Germans decide to stop manufacturing the engine. In response, he engaged the services of race engineering Al Melling to design a V8 engine that TVR could manufacture in-house and even potentially offer for sale to other car manufacturers. I don't think that ever panned out, but they made a couple of concepts. The result was a Speed 8 with an AJP8 engine, 360 horsepower, top speed of 185. A 4.5 liter version of the engine was later offered with 420 horsepower. Like I said, I guess they did. They did sort of make their own sort of custom V8 for the platform. Very interesting. I never realized that. So your pick would be the R8 with a V8. If you have to pick a car with a V8 that's not American,
I mean,
would it be?
It would be that or the ISF.
ISF is a good shout. What engine's in the ISF?
Same as the RC. It's a 2UR. There's a host aftermarket for that. Like, the thing of it is that I would want a manual, so like that would be part of the project. Not to say that an ISF versus an R8 is a comparable cost perspective project, but yeah, an ISF with a manual, try to get as much weight of it out of it as I can. I do like the old RCFs. I specifically liked the one with the carbon package where it had the carbon fiber roof and wing. It's almost as if that was the inspiration for the carbon fiber roof for the Mustang, which I got and our supporters got a sneak glimpse at on Facebook.
Yes, with a reel coming out tomorrow on it. By the way, post that as a reel tomorrow because it's going to be good.
Steve would like the V8 from a Land Cruiser, though that, depending on which generation you're talking about, that is a UZ or UR family. And that's what I was saying before. Like, a 1UR, 3UR are truck engines. But if you free up the airflow, they will make good power in a road car. DC over in YouTube says, hey, Greg, I got a new oil cap gasket in June. The HD Vitin gasket oil cap from IPD. He's speaking Volvo, so I'm assuming you know exactly what he's talking about. It's cheaper and way a lot better looking than the OEM one. Seals the oil better. Awesome. Grim Jen over on YouTube says the RCF would be cool. The RCF is a cool little platform. It's just they're heavy, so I would have to figure out how to get a lot of weight out of them. DC also loves the FV8. DC always wanted an ISF V8 when they first came out. The good news is they're very cheap now. Very affordable.
Well, very is not it depends on what your definition of very is, but considering what they started at, yes. You can find examples with around 100,000, 150,000 miles, which, by the way, is still nothing for that platform, for between 17 to 25,000, which is quite a good price. And honestly, quite frankly, that engine will never die. So, yeah, that's a good price. And if you can, pick one up because their values, I think, are going to start going up in the next couple of years.